I am Dr. Dwan Robinson from the Department of Educational Studies, and it's my pleasure to join you for this session. Dr. Strycker will be sharing with us some information on creating and using instructional videos, screencasts, podcasts to increase instructor presence, increase student interaction, and expedite feedback on online courses. Dr. Strycker comes by this profession from many, many years of experience and expertise in online teaching and learning. Each semester, he's taught a course on online teaching and learning, helping students understand the history of online education, developing skill sets to be able to design and develop on and deliver online instruction. He has 13 years of online teaching in higher education, so he's not new to this area. He was K-12 district technology coordinator. He wrote grants. He oversaw the installation of satellite systems and high-speed internet access for school buildings. So he's very much astute in terms of the application of online teaching and learning for K-12 environments. He's also done some research in this area with a number of journals. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Jesse Strycker. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this session.
All right, well, hello everybody. Hopefully you're hearing me and all is well. I'm used to it flipping to me seeing myself, but I see myself down there, so we should be good. I don't see panic in the chat yet, so that's always a good sign. So thank you very much, Dwan, for that introduction. So as she said, I'm Jesse Strycker. I'm a faculty member here, and if you look on the pages, you will see it listed as instructional technology, though we have a name change going through. And so if you've seen the flyer, it says innovative learning design and technology. We feel that's a better representation of what it is we do, because a lot of times people will hear instructional technology and either confuse us with the Office of Information Technology, or they will think that we're just computer people. And really, instructional technology involves any technology that can support learning. So anywhere that learning happens, we can have a place in helping that. And so that's just always a nice thing I like to say on the side, just to help understand that, but also having a sense of where we are. So I am very proud to be a member of the Patton College of Education, and inside that I'm in educational studies, and then, like I said, instructional technology, soon to be fully listed as innovative learning design and technology. So thank you so much. We've had a little bit of stuff with Teams, so there'll be a little bit of a delay, as you've seen with some of these going back and forth. You've already had 3 outstanding presentations from wonderful colleagues doing great things, and you'll see some of similar things here. So there'll be a little bit of overlap, but there should be some other examples that should help that. Hopefully we'll have some good conversation during this, so it's not just me talking at you, as exciting as that is for the entire session. So we will see, first of all, if we can get the slideshow shared properly, and we will go from there. So, oh, well, always lovely to be greeted by an error report that PowerPoint has crashed in the background. So if you'll bear with me just a second. Now, oh no, Word crashed, pardon me. Okay, are you seeing the slideshow currently?
No, Dave. Oh, no, Jesse. We can see your Teams.
Okay, curious. All right. Are we good now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. This is, as I was joking with people before this session started, a frighteningly long title for this kind of thing, so I don't recommend that for presentations. But I wanted to try to cover the amount of ground that we would try to address, and the idea of instructional videos, screencasts, podcasts, but also thinking about things like our presence as instructors, how we can get our students interacting in different ways, and expediting feedback. So very quickly, Dwan already mentioned some of this. I'm a former middle school and high school teacher. I'm also a former school, district technology coordinator. And so I have been in both sides of the rooms in a school system before, loved that time. Variety of university teaching. When I was a grad student at Indiana University, got to teach quite a bit online. East Carolina, our program was entirely online. Ohio University, 4 years in so far, and everything's been related to instructional or educational technology, but a lot of opportunities to teach face-to-face, online, or hybrid. As many of you know, you probably have taught hybrid as well. That can be where you have a mixed number of meetings between face-to-face and online. It can be where some of the students are face-to-face and some are online. Those can be a little tricky to teach. But more and more with different learning management systems like Blackboard or Canvas, there's always a certain hybrid nature to your teaching anyway. And so you may need to think about, even if you're teaching face-to-face, how much of a hybrid element are you bringing into your classroom because of this? So a couple of things we know from the literature that we kind of want to keep as a background as we think about these things. So the number of students taking on courses online continues to grow each year. About 4 years ago, that kind of plateaued, but it was still growing. It was one of those things where the literature kind of says it stopped, but it was still growing by about 2 or 3%, which was slower than the usual 8 to 10, 12%. However, even with all this growth, the literature tells us online education has high attrition rates. Students don't finish, students drop out, students kind of fade away on us. Educators teaching online find that they are taking more time and energy than face-to-face teaching, which can lead to higher levels of burnout, but also not necessarily the best self-care if you're trying to be online all the time or you're not managing your time very well. It can be really easy to lose that balance if you're entirely online. Online students suffer from greater feelings of isolation and disconnectedness. And so that's one of those things why we really want to try to increase our presence and the feeling of embodiment as much as possible. Even if they don't ever, we're not physically in the same room together. If they can hear our voices on a regular basis, if they can see our faces on a regular basis, if we can see each other and hear each other, that brings that up a little more and it feels a little less isolated. And the other thing we keep seeing in the literature is that instructor presence is crucial, but more so feedback is crucial. If it's just the old model when online learning started, where it was almost more of a correspondence course model of here, turn in stuff and I'll give you grades. That was, new and innovative briefly, but kind of like how PowerPoint isn't the end all be all of presentations, you want to be careful to never fall into that.
There's something happening right now at the university, so I'm going to just look at this for a minute.
Oh, okay. Is it impacting our connectivity or?
We can still hear you, Jesse.
Okay. All right. Good
Yeah,
deal.
you can.
Okay. I didn't know, since I only see my slides right now, if it was something I needed to be more aware of. All righty. So we kind of have a philosophical quandary as online instructors as we move forward of why reinvent the wheel? There are a lot of amazing resources out there. Why not just get all the resources other people have made so that you can focus just on your teaching? That's certainly one school of thought. On the other side, if you don't produce any of your content for your students, where's the you in your class? Once again, if you're only ever pointing them to other people, where are you? So we kind of get the old conundrum also of stage on the stage, guide on the side, or are we something else right now? Where's the balance on that as we go forward? So something important to think about of, charting a middle course, perhaps. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. Sometimes there's some great resources and we don't want to overdo it. So some of our objectives today: compare and contrast differing software packages. We'll get into that a little bit when we get to demonstrations. Demonstrate competency if we have time, create effective presentations and tools that support learning, and getting comfortable with being good enough. Those last two are really going to be the bigger objectives. And we can do more demonstration as we have time, though I know some of the previous presenters have talked about using things like screencast-o-matic, so I may not have to spend as much time with that. So the focus of the presentation, using your own videos, using your own audio, and considering how you can empower your students to do the same. So encouraging them to make their own videos and their own audio as well. So we're going to just kind of work through this as what is it, how it can be used, what are some examples, what are some advanced ways we can leverage these options. So before we even get into this, one simple thing I always like to ask people is, as part of your practice, even if you're not teaching online, but you're face-to-face, is do you have a picture of yourself somewhere in either your Blackboard shell, on your syllabus, on a landing page if you use something else? How often do you even have just a picture of yourself? So people know who you are and what you look like, just to kind of think about that. So just real quick, hopping over here to the chat, I can see a couple people yes, a couple people no. And you might think about, if you do that, if you don't have that intentionally, or do you do that just something you don't think about? Because it's just such a nice, quick, easy way to show. And I have to tell you, with my first name being Jesse, I'd say at least half the emails I get from students who haven't looked me up on the faculty page will say, "Dear Miss Strycker." And that's fine. I have a gender ambiguous name. But it's always kind of funny. So that's just one real quick way to be able to do that. Miss Ashley, nice. So yeah, that's just one way to help with some of that. And yep, always good to put those pictures. Everyone still seeing the slides? Just want to make sure we're still good. Okay, good deal. Thank you. As long as just one person responds, that's great. Though we have variety there. Good deal. So that's one thing to think about, is that one little bit of personal nature. Also, how much do you even just tell a story about yourself? You know, we always have our students introduce themselves face-to-face. You may do an icebreaker more readily. But when you're doing an online class, do you ever really introduce yourself? Do you say more than just the boilerplate that someone could find looking you up online generically? Whenever I ask my students to introduce themselves, I give them a couple paragraphs about myself. It's probably more than they want to know. But once again, it's just that one little bit of extra effort to try to help them understand. I talk about what my background is. I talk about what my family does. I talk about my past experiences. I even add in little things like how I used to be a high school track and field coach and how I connected to kids that way as well. And so just thinking about how much more presence can you provide online before we even get to the multimedia stuff, just these little tiny practices that we can change about how we approach that. So just a couple things to consider. So an instructional video is one of our very first things we'll talk about. It's a video where you appear on camera, or maybe not, where you convey to your students a particular concept. And so this can be critical concepts to your field that you may want to unpack early. It may be trying to encourage them to think a different way. And so one thing, if you were a graduate of the program I went through, everyone knows this example. But as you guys aren't, you won't know this one, so that'll be fine. Let's exit out of here for just a second. Though, as we've been finding on these presentations, the transition is often a bit slow to go back to the screen here. Let's see, there we go. All right, so if we're living right, you are hopefully now seeing the Teams page. Okay. All right, so not that one, not that one. We're getting there. There we go. So this gentleman is Dr. Abby Brown, one of my colleagues when I was at East Carolina. And like I said, this is a quick video that does something that was a class exercise when we were students. And so we'll just go ahead and do this real quick.
Hi, I'm Abby Brown, and I'd like to teach you the concept of glurb. So I'm going to start by showing you a couple of examples of glurb. Let's see, this is glurb, and so is this. This is glurb, and this is glurb. But but sometimes it helps to see what something is not, just in case the idea isn't quite getting there. So here, this is glurb. This is not glurb. And let's see, this is glurb. This is not glurb.
So are we starting to get a sense of what glurb may or may not be? If anyone wants to throw a guess in the chat there. Excellent. Some great guesses there. So we'll just go ahead and finish this out real quick.
This is not glurb. So that might have helped. What a definition for glurb is any object that is completely vertical. So glurb and vertical are synonyms. Vertical is the actual word, and glurb is just something that I made up. But let's look at some other examples just to see if we can kind of really lock down the concept of glurb. So this is glurb. Is this? Think about it. Is this glurb? This is glurb. But if I do this, is it still glurb? So glurb is anything that is any object that is completely vertical.
So now we never really get an answer if we watch the next couple of seconds of that video of if a video is going to, you know, like when the scissors are open or when the little umbrella is open, if that changes it. It is still vertical, so that should be glurb. That in a 2-minute video takes and distills a concept that is taught to brand new grad students in a program at Indiana University that normally goes on from anywhere from about 15 minutes to a half an hour, fully breaking down that concept. And so think about in your own teaching, is there a concept like that or just a mindset or thinking that you would like your students to think about that you could put up as a, you know, before your class even starts or between classes where, you know, is there a concept there that could be beneficial? You know, even if it's something where you're trying to delineate things slightly. And so perhaps if you are in rec sports education and you want to really quickly explain the difference between, you know, a forward versus a striker versus a winger. And so if you're into football or soccer, you may know that distinction very clearly, but that may be something that you don't really want to spend a lot of time on, but you might say very quickly in a minute or less of a video. Now, one of the things we have to be careful about when we start doing instructional videos is how far do they go? Usually we want to try to have them be concepts. Now, sometimes when we ask students, okay, well, give me a concept, we end up with something like this.
Peaches are great to eat and cook with, but their skin can be annoying to peel if you don't know a little trick. This video will teach you how to blanch peaches to make peeling them simple. The things you will need are a large pot, a deep bowl, tongs or a slotted spoon.
And so right away we can tell the student has gone past it being a concept. If it was a concept video, it'd be what is blanching. However, they've gone on to doing a procedural video of how to blanch. And so it's a real subtle distinction, but it's one of those things we want to think about of making clear when we ask students to do these kind of videos or ourselves, are we mixing and matching things that we shouldn't be? And so I know for our students, it's hard for them to sometimes separate those concepts initially. And so we want to think about the proper focus of our videos. Since this doesn't have to be real big for this next part, I will leave it on here. So Defining concepts in your field is usually a great option. Taking students through a concept. So these are the kinds of things you need to think about. I often do that in assignments where I need them to think about certain factors or how to do certain types of problem solving, or even introducing oneself or a class transition. So one of the things I do for every single class I teach, especially the online ones, is that I will introduce every video. Okay, that's the one I did not load. Okay, so let's see, we can do, all right. Greetings, 6012ers. I hope this message finds you well and that your first week of the semester has been a great one. I wanted to take a moment just to say hello and introduce myself and welcome you to the semester. Some of you I've already met in person. Some of you I will probably meet later, but if not, I always like to have this type of introductory message just to say hello and be able to have you see me that I'm a real person. Now, that kind of probably sounds strange to you. However, at my old university, the program I taught in was entirely online. And so with that being the case, we seldom would see students unless they came to office hours in person, or if they came to graduation, we would meet them. But if they didn't, we would never see them. And so a lot of times it could easily be just a name on a screen and typing. And over time, you can learn to recognize certain people's patterns of typing or expressions they use. Certain types of ways they express themselves. And you can kind of get a connection, but it can be a little challenging at times because online classes can sometimes be a little isolating, and it can be easy to feel like no one's really there, even though everyone is. And so that's one of those things I like to do, just to say hello, you know, see that I'm here. You can sort of see my office a little bit, that you're always welcome to visit in person. But I also like to do this to encourage you to consider doing a video of your own. I mean, all of you have done wonderful introductions so far and are continuing to do so, but you might also consider if you feel comfortable doing a video. You might not, and that's fine. You might also just consider, instead of doing a response to a reading later or giving someone feedback in writing form, you might consider if a video is a good option or if a screencast is. Both of these we'll do later, so you'll get experience with them anyway. Or if you want to try something like a podcast, which I've also shared in a resource that will be covered in another video. And so it's just a nice way to further build that connection with each other and really feel that we're all, you know, in this class together. Because of the nature of this class being asynchronous, it's a little easier to feel disconnected, but you have a little more freedom and flexibility to complete assignments as you have time. So there are some trade-offs, and these are things we'll think about during the course of the semester. But I just wanted to show you that it's really, you know, don't make it a bigger barrier than it needs to be for you, because a lot of people will worry about, you know, can they do this all in one recording? Can they do this without noise interruption? Is the lighting perfect? As you can see, this is just in my office. This is just overhead lighting. Obviously, we can see that we have some shadowing going. Oops, wrong hand, over here. We have some shadowing going on this side of my face. The room is a little dark, such as in the background here, which you don't really need to be seeing the back of my, you know, the side of my desk here. But, you know, basically showing you that you can do things very quickly and casually and not have to have them be perfect, but have them still be effective. So just some things to think about. Otherwise, I hope you have a great semester. I look forward to working with you and seeing the great stuff that you're going to do during this semester. Everyone has different skill levels, so please don't worry. I'm sure you're all going to do a great job. And the most important thing is that you get better and more comfortable and more confident. And that's the goal of the class. Is I don't expect you to be experts when you're done. I just expect you to be better than when you started and have a better sense of where you want to go next. So have a great semester. I hope everything goes well. As always, please don't hesitate to contact me. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to stop by office hours. I'm happy to schedule appointments so we can do meetings on. Anyway, so that one I let play out because that also talks about some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about today, especially being comfortable with making casual videos or casual audio and not being obsessed with perfection. So I point out a couple things on that video that I don't do, you know, about the shadowing. You know, in rewatching this, it's humorous to go back and see, you know, I've got shadowing over from my glasses where they're being down. I Clearly should have had some water before I recorded because I keep having where I'm swallowing a couple times. You can notice I'm looking down instead of at the camera. So there's all these things I can be critical about, but it's still an effective video. So once again, just a real quick question. We can just throw some answers in the chat. How many of you greet your class in a similar fashion? Do you produce some type of media that you can use to offload some of that to have your students be a little more connected? And also, did you notice other things I did in that video besides just introducing myself? Okay, excellent. Yep, I also cover my syllabus. We have a hand raised there, so another. VoiceThread, another great option. Yeah, it makes it pretty easy to not have to worry about it. Yep, try to make them feel comfortable with their skill level and where we're going to go. Yep, VoiceThread is a great option. I use it on and off as well. Sometimes there's some access things that are a little strange about VoiceThread. Okay, so a couple of folks there, so that's good. Okay, so a couple more folks. So you're in there. So if you don't do something like this, once again, kind of like with, yeah, to stay engaged, absolutely. I also promoted them trying to do their own videos and having more embodiment. And what I've found in the past is, unless enough people do it, the students that do tend to drop off, which is kind of a shame because they see other people going back to old habits of just doing text responses. And so sometimes you may need to require them to do it to get it out of their comfort level and such. So let's hop back to the slides for a moment here. So usually the software is going to come by default with the camera or with your computer, so you don't really need to worry about buying anything. So some of the popular options are the MacBook. There are a number of Apple users in the college. The MacBook Pro comes with QuickTime Pro right away. We'll look at that a little bit later, but it automatically allows you to be able to connect or to do various types of videos, and we'll look at that. Camtasia Studio used to be kind of the old tried and true commercial version, and a lot of universities have licenses of that. There are free options like Cam Studio, which is open source, Screencast-O-Matic, depending on what mode you use it in, and others. There are a lot of software options. I didn't want to inundate you with too many because usually it's find a tool that you like and can work with and go from there. You don't need to necessarily try everything, but it's good to have a variety there. So a couple of the things we can think about, advanced uses, we can do lecture capture, we can assign introductions and reminders. I always do assignment introductions for every single assignment just to make sure, even if I've talked about it in class and face-to-face, I usually will have a video version of it as well, because inevitably there's extra questions that come up. And that way I can also point out common mistakes and say, in the past years, this is the point that most students have had trouble with, and here's what they did, and here's how to avoid it, or here's how to fix it. Providing instruction and encouraging students to make their own. You already saw that in my introduction video, that I always am trying to get students to produce media because I want to hear them and I want to see them. That was one of the things when I first started teaching. Like I said, my program that I taught in was entirely online, and I wouldn't see people. And so I really felt isolated as an instructor, and I really wanted to hear their voices and see their faces as well. So even if the only thing I could get them to do was put up a picture of themselves in an introduction, or at least some type of graphical representation if they didn't feel comfortable, I at least had that additional sense of connection. Now, the idea of looking at other angles and perspectives is to kind of address the concern of not everyone's comfortable being on camera. It's kind of one of those ironies. As educators, we're in front of people educating them and we're talking, but suddenly if there's a camera in front of us, it changes the dynamic. I know it's one of the things my students who are going to be future professors and future designers and future technology leaders, is that also is a moment for them that's quite concerning, but it's also something we have to think about as a cultural dynamic as well. Some cultures do not want to appear on camera or potentially are not allowed to be on camera. So we need to think about that and how we modify assignments. There might also be the idea that they don't know people well enough yet. And so we need to have some type of compromise. And so one of the things that I like to do are things like this, where literally all I've done is taken a web camera and point it down on my desk. And we can see very quickly, I'm still on camera, but you're not seeing my face. And this is usually a way to make people much more comfortable. So we'll just watch a little bit of this.
Greetings 6,000 tours. This is a little bit of a different video, as this is clearly my desktop and a sheet of paper. You can see my keyboard above, my mouse to the side, as terribly exciting as that is. But anyway, I know in the past it's been sometimes a little confusing when I've said do a mock-up or a diagram or something. And so I wanted to make sure that we were clear on the understanding of what I was saying to storyboard. I could have also said make a paper prototype, but the idea is, we're working with paper, we're keeping things relatively unofficial until we're actually building stuff. So now, if you've done videos before, my apologies, I'm not sure why my camera, let's see if this helps. Okay, has something to focus on. So if we were doing a movie, we might do a storyboard where we have our different scenes, and we might have something where we know we're going to have two people and they're going to be talking about something. And then we might have, not sure why the autofocus is causing problems, but we would essentially just keep going through, and we'd have different scenes where maybe now we have a cityscape. And it's essentially just directions to know as we move from scene to scene what's happening.
And we'll go ahead and leave it there. I continue to wrestle with the camera a little bit and I make some adjustments, but I basically talk students through the entire time. So that's a pretty low-tech way of doing it. I'm literally drawing on paper with a pen, but I'm talking people through the concepts. So one of the things that may not be as obvious there until you see more of these is I constantly point out mistakes that I'm making. And I also talk about why I'm doing things. So one of the things I'm trying to do is make my pedagogy as clear as possible. Now, part of this is that class is geared towards people that are going to be teaching online as faculty members in the future, or going to be instructional designers that are producing media to support those faculty members. And so I want them to know that some of the things I'm doing are intentional. Some of the things are purely mistakes. Sometimes I point out, like later on in that video, I change the lighting and I say, well, look, now it's focused, but now I have all these shadows. So that's something you have to think about. So I'm constantly trying to keep them aware of what's going on in my mind, what's intentional, what's accidental, what things might, what are my goals in showing them something like that. And so it's beneficial a lot of times to have that extra layering. Not all students will pick up on that or find value in it, but I've had many, many more that do than don't. So another thing to think about is, are you comfortable having mistakes or not? Are you comfortable having those moments where you kind of own up to them and say, boy, this didn't go the way I thought it would have. This is why we did it this way. And then you can have it be a teaching moment and go, well, could we have done this differently? What might I do differently in the future? And it then shifts that to having the students be a little more of an authority. So just something to think about there. Really quickly, once you start producing videos, you can put them into Blackboard very easily, since that's our platform here. You can just go to Content, Video, and these are normally animated, but you have the two options here where you can put them, link a YouTube video or actually embed them. You can also just attach them if you want, and all three are good options. I tend to use YouTube because it's widely accessible, but we also need to think about our students that may travel overseas. And so we have a number of Chinese students in our program, and it works great when they're here with us, but when they go home for any time, Google is not accessible in China. And so that might be a good time to use Panopto, or just to have it be shareable from Blackboard itself as a download. So that's just one of those things to think about, where the convenience of YouTube may have a problem there, or if it's in a Google Drive, similar issue. So you may want to put some things in a OneDrive instead, or in Dropbox, or some other way to make it accessible to your students. So if we pause there for a second on instructional videos before we get into screencasting, are there any questions at this point, or just general thoughts you want to share about videos, or just instructional videos as a whole? No, I actually very seldom use Blackboard for much of anything. I actually teach most of my classes through a series of layered Google Docs, and I'll be happy to share my PowerPoint. I want to optimize the pictures. I put in very high-res pictures initially, and it makes the it makes the size of the file much larger than it needs to be, but I'll be happy to share that. And I'm going to also provide a resource sheet to help you find a lot of the resources afterward. The sketch option and share it, I've done it a little bit. I've had more students explore that than I have. Okay, limitations. Yeah, Blackboard, I'll put things, usually just links pointing to other sites, but generally, like I said, Allison, I tend to teach using Google Docs. Yep, that's a wonderful point that you can record in Zoom. You can also record Google Hangouts. We obviously have the recordings from Microsoft Teams. Panopto is great. Panopto sometimes will have weird authentication issues if you don't set the things right. So you force your students to always be logged in to Blackboard to authenticate to be able to access Panopto, unless you specifically make sure that you have the access rights. You can also, if it's on YouTube, you can manually change these settings. So let's see, if I drop back to one of my videos here, I can go to the settings, and right now it's at a very low quality, 480p, which would be what the standard resolution was for old televisions, like old tube TVs. And so I can default it quite low, or I can default it quite high. So sometimes that's a really nice option to have. To be able to do that. Panopto may do that. I'm not certain, because I've not used Panopto for a while, since I ran into a couple of issues with it. Let's see, which software is easiest to put together videos or have the least difficulties, user-friendly? If you're on a MacBook Pro, QuickTime Pro makes it very, very easy to work with if you're just doing casual recording. You can do, I've done Cam Studio on Windows platforms, and that works fairly well. The drawback is both of them make very large file sizes, and so you definitely want to put them on a service like YouTube, because the file size is so large that it becomes a problem for students to download it, especially students with slower internet. And so you want to be careful about that. I've not done the recording on the whiteboard settings. You should be able to. And if not, you can do a screen capture, which we'll talk about. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Do I embed quizzes in my videos? I don't typically. I will usually, if I do something like that, will ask them to pause the video and possibly go to a certain link. I know some people do it. You can do different overlays and things like that that encourage people to do that. I don't traditionally, because I try to keep the videos as basic as possible when I'm first introducing them to folks. But I do know some people that do that. I just don't do that much myself. I know some people like it quite a bit. So it's definitely worth exploring. But I often like to say, you know, if you pause your video and kind of think about these things and then return to the video, can be a nice way to help with having some level of pacing there. I'll make sure my students watch. Yeah, you certainly can do it that way. And I know some of the folks on campus that are using Top Hat will kind of do similar things, or they will have quizzes embedded in how Top Hat displays the classes, and they'll try to do that. Can YouTube be private? Yes, you can share with individual people. And so if you just want to have your class list and have all their YouTube accounts, you can share it with only them. All the videos I've showed you so far and the other ones I'll show are all set to unlisted, which means you have to have the link to find it. And so you won't be able to find it otherwise or search for it. If you do public, then they're easily found. And so that's just something you want to think about if you want to have people doing it. I found unlisted to work very well Private is good, but you have to remember to make sure that you have the correct addresses for everyone you want to be able to view that. So that's just something to kind of think about. Let's see. Yeah, so yeah, there's different ways you can handle that through that. So the privacy settings are pretty good on that. And so, like I said, if you do private, that can be a good option. Okay, so a couple other suggestions there for embedding quizzes, so that's excellent. I'm glad this chat will be around. I actually kind of hope that we can share, Vimeo is another nice alternative. That's a great thought as well. For K-12, you can also do things like TeacherTube, which is okay. It's not always as popular because not as many people go there. Let's see, some feedback about students. What's I've generally found YouTube to be pretty widely accessible. If nothing else, they can also go to it on their cell phones. That's been one of the things I've found over the years, and also in talking to colleagues who also serve areas where there's quite a bit of poverty and connectivity issues, is generally most students will still have a smartphone that they can connect to a lot of these. And with a lot of packages having unlimited data, that's not a prohibitive thing. And most public libraries, as well as most public access points, aren't going to block a site like YouTube. And so that works out pretty well. Another thing that I do occasionally is to make compressed versions of them. Podcasts we'll talk about in a little bit. We'll touch that in just a touch. Is sometimes I'll make them available for download. And so if they're going to be on campus or somewhere they know they're going to have good internet, they can download all of them and view them at their leisure is another option. So, okay, so some great thoughts there. Since we want to be mindful of our time, let's go ahead and move ahead here real quick. We'll hopefully have some more time for questions here. So, screencasting, very similar to instructional videos, almost identical, except you're showing a portion of your screen. Now, this is kind of becoming old hat for people because of all of our online these days because of COVID-19, that it's not that unusual to hear someone narrating over their slides and such. And so this isn't too bad anymore. It's really nice to be able to just walk people through something instead of just talking about it. You might still do a demonstration in class if you're face-to-face, but I always provide another video version of it because inevitably someone will forget a step. So popular examples, how to complete a specific task. This is how you submit an assignment. This is how you work through an IRB application. This is how you fill out the scholarship form. This is how you calculate the statistic in SPSS. Providing a tour. I'm walking through our course. I do that at the beginning. A number of you said you do this as well. I talk them through the entire Blackboard course or my Google Doc pages or anything else I'm using with the class so they know exactly where things are and how to find them. Troubleshooting is also a big thing I do of this, sometimes I'll say this is a common mistake that gets made. So I'll do this, for example, with VoiceThread and making sure people's settings are correct, or if we're sharing Google Docs in class, how to set up the different settings. So things you can do that way are very helpful. One of the other things, and I'm sure I have this on a later slide, but I want to make sure, is this is really powerful if you get your students to do it, because then they can show you exactly what they're doing. You can go, oh, okay, you missed this step. As opposed to having to email back and forth, 6, 8, 10 times before you might even figure out what the problem is itself that actually is really happening. And so that can be really powerful. So one of the big things, and we'll come back to this a couple times in the presentation, is not only is it beneficial for you to be using these to really provide support and be a presence in your classes, but also to really help give that voice to your students, because it'll make a huge difference. So software, once again, comes pre-installed for the most part. There's also some great virtual options out there. So once again, if you're on a MacBook, it already comes built in with QuickTime Pro. Sounds like someone might want to mute their mic. Not a big deal, but just something to think about. We've got some free options. Some of you may be old school with Jing. Jing got replaced by TechSmith Capture, but it's still around. It's a real nice option. Cam Studio, once again, can do it. Screencastify, we'll look at a little bit later. Screencast-O-Matic, I know Rob and Ambrosi showed you last time, so you have a little bit of familiarity with that. Those are all really great options. So some advanced uses: provide reminder videos of how to complete different procedures. Really limits repetitious email on how many times you have to tell someone how to do something. You can just point them to the video. Or if you have already covered something, you can point to the specific time of a video. I'll routinely do that and say, oh, that's a great question. If you go back to this link here and look between the 2:25 and 3:15, your answer is going to be right there. And so it really minimizes how much work you're having to do to re-answer the same question. One of the things I really like to do is, once I've built up enough of those types of videos where I can just have students reference them, is just-in-time instruction is really powerful in that by offloading these tasks to videos I've already produced, I can then produce anything I need to very quickly to address specific questions that a student might be having. And so if we drop out of here for just a second, and I'm sorry, we had some issues with these loading earlier, so that's why I have all these delightful tabs open. Okay, so we'll just go through part of my collection here. All right, so this was a student who was struggling to figure out why something was not working. And instead of writing up a long explanation, this video covers it all in 1 minute and 24 seconds. All said and done, it took me about 4 minutes to produce. The email probably would have taken me 7 or 8 because I tend to wordsmith too much.
Hi, Logan. I wanted to just do this quick video to help out here. So my guess is that when you borrowed links from your classmates, you probably have a bunch of things like this. Well, if you notice, beside here, there's no little icon of any kind. And this may be what you're seeing that I can't see. Whereas if you look down here, I see this little icon where if I hover my mouse over it, because I'm in editing view, I can't see it, but see if it'll show up. No, this will normally tell you that it's globally available. I think it's, okay, there we go, public. So if you don't have a public item here, you have a couple of options. If it's just a few of them that are like that, my guess is it's probably all of them. You can change your settings here by going to edit. However, my guess is the 20 you borrowed probably are all like that. So what you can do is go to bulk edit, and it says click item to select. So I can go through and click on as many of them as I want. And then I can choose to go down here, and I don't want to organize it, and I don't want to share it with a group. I don't want to send an email or generate a report or get rid of them. Instead, I want to go here and convert them to be public. And it says change from privacy done, though you can't see all of it on there. And so now I can see I've got that little icon. And so that should take care of what is going on with your bookmarks.
And so that was just a real nice way to really quickly address that question. But also, even though I mentioned the student's name at the beginning, any other student that has that question, I can go right back and give that same video to them. And so instead of having to write out a response, I can say, oh, here's a quick answer for that I sent to one of your classmates. And right away, I've been able to really up my productivity and be able to answer people. When I was first starting out, I would save a certain number of emails I had written, and I would just copy and paste those in. But I found this to be much more personal because, once again, it's me talking, and it is very helpful for that. So once again, providing instructions, encouraging students to make their own. It's also a great way to do peer assessment. I have all my undergrads use this to review each other's lesson plans so that every student that is getting feedback can see exactly what part of it that they're highlighting and talking about, and they're scrolling through and they're commenting on, as opposed to just reading text of feedback and trying to figure out where it equates to. And so it can just be a very quick, very powerful way to do that. Kind of the same idea as with doing videos. If you want to embed them or put them in Blackboard, same idea. You go to content, you go to video, and then you can put them on YouTube if you want. You can embed them, or once again, you can just attach them. I have students usually share them on Google Doc pages as links instead of having to go this route, but this does work if you are working within the Blackboard environment. Works very well, very easy. One of the things you can also think about is mixing and matching these of maybe you want to be on screen for a little bit, but then have it be you just working with your desktop. Maybe you want to go back and forth. Maybe some of the lecture you want to do as a talking head, some of it you want to just do narration of slides, and that's fine. Sometimes you want to combine them. Sometimes this allows you to flip the classroom if you want to offload a certain amount of basic content and say, please make sure you watch these 3 videos I produced for you before you come to class. Or by next week, you need to review these 3 things or provide this amount of feedback to your classmates so that we can really talk about what happened in the work and what trends you were seeing, so you can get to the richer conversation and interactions as opposed to just having to do the basics of talking through something, how to do X, Y, and Z. And once again, greater sense of embodiment. By the time a class ends, my students will have seen me through the course of about 20 or 30 videos and heard me through the course of about 20 podcasts. And so even though, once again, it's an online class, they see me and hear from me all the time. And so there's very little sense of disconnection. So a couple of quick video considerations. Don't set them to autoplay or a loop. It sounds like a good idea, but the problem is someone they may be wanting to read something else on the page. And if they're on a slow internet connection and they have to wait for that video to load, then they can't scroll down to the little bit of text that they need. Consider streaming it versus downloading so that, once again, it can be accessed anywhere. You can know exactly minute-wise where you were. And so maybe you have it on your home computer, but you need to check it out somewhere else. You can just grab it off of YouTube or another streaming service. But I always encourage you, keep a copy of anything you produce for yourself so you can edit it for the future. That's going to be one of those skill sets you're going to learn later and as you become more comfortable with this. But it just gives you more options for the future instead of having it be a one-off. One thing to keep in mind, if you do your work on a Mac, the Mac by default has a higher screen resolution, which means any type of screen capture you do is going to be a much larger file by default. And so you can end up with some pretty huge files. So just be careful about that when producing some of these things. Okay, so we'll get to podcasting in just a second here. Let's drop back. Excellent. Glad to hear that you... Oh, I already knew Robin did that, but that's great. Yeah, thank you, Dean Middleton. I always try to emphasize that things don't go perfectly and try to adjust. We've already had to make some adjustments in this presentation. And so I also will routinely call out things that are happening in the background, and I'll say, you may be hearing my dog wrestling with one of my cats right now. I'm sorry about that. Or, uh-oh, the mail's here. You're going to hear the dog in a second. And then I do try to pause it and say, we'll be right back, and then jump back into the recording so that it's not them hearing 20 minutes of a dog barking or something in the background. So Kimberly, for your question about screencasting, Robin addressed this as well. I use Screencast-O-Matic. I also use Screencastify, which is a plugin you can put into the Chrome browser, which if we have time, we'll talk about, though our time has gone much quicker than I would have anticipated. If I'm on my Mac, I will a lot of time. Oh, thank you, Dwan. Yeah, I do try to have humor, laugh at myself as much as possible. I won't show you all of them, but I tell a lot of stories from my days in the trenches. And it is a lot of story time kind of things from my own professional experience and trying to have them learn from my mistakes. I will routinely record on my Mac all the time with QuickTime Pro. It's great because it's already built in, but I have at least one screencasting or video application on every computer I use so that I can freely move on any platform and record. Once you kind of get used to it, you'll figure out which ones you like for which devices. So for example, when I record on my MacBook, it sounds different to me than when I record with my webcam on any other computer. Or even if I use my webcam plugged into my MacBook, I can tell what I've done and it just sounds different to me. Which is best for Microsoft? Really, unless you need to do really long videos, Screencast-O-Matic does a great job being all online and you can download your files. And so it doesn't matter that you're on Microsoft, but it does a real nice job. I'll provide, like I said, in the next day or so, I will provide a list. I should have had that for you, but there's a lot of really great options. And sometimes it's just a matter of shopping around until you find one that fits the best with you. Let's see, singular conferencing applications, do real-time captioning. Yeah, Teams does. I believe Zoom has started. One of the things I've not showed, let me drop back for just a second. Okay, so if I go back to this introductory video, one of the nice things about YouTube is it does auto close captioning. So if people want to, you can see that. So I'll play this for just a second. I will probably meet later, but if not, I always like to have this type of introductory message just to say hello and be able to have you see me that I'm a real person. Now that kind of probably sounds strange to you. And so as you can see, it does a pretty good job. One of the things as you do more videos is you'll learn to kind of regulate the cadence of your voice. And so basically devices will recognize you more readily. With YouTube, you can actually download the transcript, or you can actually modify it if it's making mistakes, and you can correct it. You can also add in captioning for other languages if you want. And so that's kind of a nice feature. I'll do that. Christopher, I don't know if Teams allows it to be downloaded, but like I said, I know YouTube does. And so please add some suggestions faculty made during your presentation to your PowerPoint. Oh, sure, I'll be happy to do that, Minjung. Okay, excellent, Chad. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to try to press into podcasting real quick just to give you some thoughts on it. I don't think we're going to have time for demonstrations to try to honor time. One of the things when I share them is I will have a variety of different tutorial links so that you can walk through it, because there's amazing resources out there. Once again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So there's a great video that's about 1.5 minutes long for Screencastify that tells you exactly how to do it. There's great videos for Screencast-O-Matic that tell you about how to do it. Jing does a good job when it was around. And so there's all these really great videos that are already produced for that. I do have some that I've produced for my various classes that I can share those as well. So I will make those available to you. And so if you respond to I'll have my email address at the very end. You can write to me, though you can also ask the committee in charge of this, and they'll be happy to provide you with that, since I think we have more folks than just College of Ed. So there's some, but we'll make sure you can get those and have that downloadable in other places. So we'll jump into podcasting here for just a little bit. I'm happy to do another one of these later where we can get into more of the nuts and bolts of how to do all this. If there's interest down the road, I'm also happy to talk about editing. You'll see in my videos, I don't do overlays, but if you want to have, like on Dr. Brown's video I showed you, Abby does little things where you can see a little like thought bubbles show up and information about like the definition of what glurb is and things like that. I can show you how to do all that in various packages if that's something beneficial, but I also have good links to those. And so really, the basic thing about this is just to get you in that comfortable mindset of producing these and then thinking about getting better. And so once again, the nuts and bolts, that's kind of more of once you find the tool you're happy with. So real quickly, let's jump into some podcasting, and then I'll do a little more Q&A. And I don't think we'll have time for demonstration, but we can certainly see. So let's hop back over here. So podcasting is just the creation of standalone audio that you either stream online or you download for later review. Terribly innovative thing. It's iPod and broadcast, because iPod gets dominantly associated with these type of audio files and the broadcast of them. So podcast, once again, terribly innovative. So popular examples: updates for class, maybe a unit, assignment, or task introduction or summation, getting into some deep explanations, but giving students a voice. Once again, they might not be comfortable making a video themselves, but usually they'll record their voice. And so that can be one of those nice little things where sometimes you may have to require it just to get them going, but it's a nice way to think about this. This is another way I have students give feedback to each other until they get comfortable doing the video aspect of things. But these can also be supplementals, but also ways to think about how to offload some tasks. So one of the things I do in every class is, if there's a discussion about, if I've required them to post either on a discussion board or on individual pages, their reflections on a reading, or if they, at the end of an assignment, once I've reviewed everything, I'll do a summation podcast and say, you know, you didn't get to see what all of the other feedback everyone else did, but here's some of the things I saw as the instructor that I think you might find interesting. Or some of you had these questions in your reflections that I'd like to spend some time talking about. And that is just a really nice way to not have to write as much feedback. I still write, you know, probably about a paragraph for everybody, but then I can talk for 5, 8, 10 minutes, a little more, and bring some other points to bear. Maybe certain things didn't come up in the discussion that I thought might have, or there might be kind of logical expansion that I can do on it and go, okay, so you guys brought up some really great points about X, Y, and Z. But there's these 3 other things I think you're going to run into when you're out in the field, either as a future teacher, a future designer, a future faculty member, you may want to think about. Sometimes when we read research, they'll really have some concerns with how the research was conducted. And so we'll really dig into that and say, all right, let's tear this apart and look at this with as critical of an eye as possible. And so if we drop out here for a second and look at one of my class pages, so when I was still using Blackboard quite a bit, there would always be this multimedia repository link I would make, and then I would throw everything in here. So here's a podcast talking about clarifying some of the assignments for the course. Here's a podcast talking about feedback from the assignment. So if we listen to just a little bit of it real quick.
Greetings, 6012ers. This is a kind of summation and reaction and kind of final podcast related to the Module 2 experiment, the web-based slideshows. This is going to be the first of 2 podcasts. This one's mainly going to focus on some of the observations of your feedback as well as some thoughts in that area, whereas the second podcast will then focus a little more about the report sheets and just some observations from that. So one of the biggest things, well, probably the 2 or 3 biggest things that were commented on when you offered feedback to each other were related to the type of fonts that were used, the size of the fonts, the colors of the fonts, the overall vividness or colors of the slideshows.
And so I go on for a little bit and talk about when we're in an area we're not as comfortable with, we tend to revert to the things we are comfortable talking about. And so in this class, they're developing, this is the online learning and teaching class. And so if someone didn't know the concept that was being taught to them through the interactive slideshow, they might then focus on the design elements. And so, and that's pretty natural. So I was just kind of making them aware of their own practice. If we go into something like a reading, this one, the first podcast is all about their thoughts and their discussion that runs for about 11 minutes. And then the second one is actually, a lot of them wanted to get into critically analyzing the research. And so this one has a little different feel.
6012ers, this is part 2 of the Module 2 reading discussion. And this was one where, like I said, at the end of the last podcast, was to focus more on some of the criticisms. And so a couple of things that came up were the timing of the study, the participants, some of the ways things were labeled. And so let's take apart just a couple of things. Though first I should say, some of the things that you commented on, while perfectly valid, were mentioned in the limitations section of the studies. And so we always need to be.
And I won't have you go through that entire, that whole experience, but we go through and really look through how good the literature is, how much information is defined in the methods section, did we find their analysis to have flaws and things like that. And so we basically did that every week. And it was really a rich way to have that additional conversation that I could cover things in addition that we might have covered in a classroom, but didn't cover online. But it also, some students would then make their own podcast to respond, or it would spur on further conversation. And so it just is a really nice way to make some of those connections. And okay, sorry, let's see. Folks are having to drop off here. That's too bad about time. I'll go just a little bit longer and folks can revisit it. But I'm so glad there were questions earlier. And so that's always the risk you run. Real quick, software generally comes pre-installed, though any recording software, if you feel more comfortable recording a memo on your phone, can work really well. That's how a lot of students will start off, is doing voice memos on their phone and uploading them. And then you can move to other software. Once again, MacBook Pro, QuickTime Pro takes care of it. Windows machines usually have a basic recorder. One of the ones I recommend, though, is Audacity. It is a great free software that's pretty easy to use. There's this thing called the layman encoder you need to make MP3s, because MP3s are much smaller, and so that's important to think about. Web services, there's things online like Podbean that will host your your different podcasts, but you don't really need a service like that. And like I said, every smartphone pretty much has some type of audio recorder. If you want to embed them in Blackboard, there's there's a basic sound recorder there. I guess I didn't, oh no, it's there. Okay. So real quick, advanced uses, providing formative feedback. It's very easy to really quickly record something. If you see students going in perhaps a direction that's not as positive for them, you can do that. You can provide assignment and unit summaries like I gave you a quick example of. Providing feedback to each other. Once again, it's easier for students to record their voice than it is for video sometimes. Sometimes you can have part of your lecture captured and they can listen to it while they are working out, or otherwise maybe they're doing something, like if they're doing something in the kitchen, for example, like if they're washing dishes or preparing a meal, they can still listen to the audio in the background and not lose anything. The other nice thing about the audio aspect is you hear the emotion behind it. You don't necessarily have a negative interpretation of, oh, I think they said something horrible in that feedback. But when you hear them, you go, oh, no, they sound really positive. It's not as bad as it initially sounded or looked. In Blackboard, you can just add audio like it shows here through adding content. Once again, you have the same option as you did with video where you can embed it, though I generally will just attach them so it doesn't autoplay. A couple of audio considerations. They take up a lot of space natively, so you want to do something like an MP3 file, which is usually just save as or export. Once again, don't have it autoplay or loop. Something a lot of early people doing this will do by accident is they'll put them all on autoplay. And then if you load a page that has multiple, all of a sudden you'll have like 3 or 4 audio files playing at the same time. As with the videos, keep a copy for yourself for future editing so that once again, you can just modify as need be. Think about mixing and matching. Sometimes videos make the most sense, sometimes screencasts, sometimes podcasts. I use all 3, and it really provides a lot of opportunities. I've really been able to flip my classroom I've wanted to. My students really feel that I'm there all the time. They see me and hear me all the time. It makes it all feel much more together, much more like a real class. Different types of advanced capturing of the lecture or related concepts, so that's great. So bringing it all together, you have a much stronger presence with your students. Like I said, they hear you, they see you, they feel that you're there and that you care. Stronger scaffolding. In the videos, you can show them what to do. In the audio, you can tell them what to do. You can show them through particular overviews of pages through screencasts. So you can have a lot of hard or soft scaffolding there, especially if you start layering in other things on top of your videos. It's highly responsive to student needs because once you have a library of videos that you can pull from and reference them to, like I said, you can get into that just-in-time instruction and really be able to answer those questions as they pop up, as you're reading student postings, as you're grading things, as you see things going in a direction that you hadn't anticipated, or you may want to steer things towards a more positive way. And it just ends up being a better experience for both students and faculty. It always has given me a much better sense of connection with my students and that I'm not isolated and they're not isolated. We're in this together. We're not alone, alone together online, I guess. Perfection isn't necessary is one of the biggest takeaways. Quick responses can be more authentic. So think about what can you do quickly that's reasonable. If you make quick efforts, they may have mistakes, but it lowers the barriers. If the professor or the instructor is making mistakes, it's okay for me to maybe have, cough a little bit or have my dog in the background, or my roommate comes in, or my kids come in and make noise. You can always get better. This is just a starting point. You're just trying to make a couple of videos, a couple of screencasts, a couple of podcasts. Sorry, I left informative assessments. If we had time, I was going to do that, but I know we don't have time for that. But think about what is one video, one screencast, one podcast that you could think about using in the summer, or that you could develop over the summer that you could use in a class in the fall right away. And if you get comfortable with that idea, then try to think about what's one thing you could make every week until the fall semester starts, and you'll have a great library to pull from already. And then you'll be able to free up that time to be able to do other things to help your students be more successful. Unfortunately, we don't have time for demonstrations. I'm happy to do that another time, but like I said, I'll share resources. A couple of quick thoughts here. This is just as you get more comfortable. Think about long-term and reusability. How can you produce them so they're not one-off things? Some of the quick, easy ways are, don't mention specific dates. Don't mention necessarily a specific event that dates something. Think about what are the most general ways to talk about concepts and procedures that allow them to be reused across multiple sections, multiple semesters. Chunking or 7 plus or minus 2, you want to make things digestible. That's just the old idea of that humans ideally can only handle about 5 to 9 things in short-term memory. And so you want to make sure people retain that. So thinking about, are you covering too much in each video or each podcast or each screencast? Timing, most experts will say anywhere between 5 to 11 minutes. Generally, the shorter the better for each video or production because of attention span issues. Split attention is, you may not want to have a talking head while you're going through slides because you're asking your students to both look at what's on the slide while listening to you and looking at you. And so that can create some problems in their learning. Do you need to buy anything? No. A second camera can be useful, such as another web camera if you want to have multiple angles, or a document camera if you want to do more on your desk. You can check these out from the Data Science and Academic Technology Center in McCracken Hall. The library also has some things, but if you're in the College of Ed, that's a great resource to be able to try them out before you buy anything. Dedicated microphone and a pop filter can be nice. If you feel the audio quality is not great, you can buy more expensive ones. You don't necessarily need it. A pop filter is just when you see something in front of a microphone, that helps when you pronounce certain things or you exhale a certain amount of air that it doesn't make excess noise. You can also just put your finger in front of your mouth or a pencil. And that's generally when you hit hard pronunciations like pa, 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 or ta, 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 in that you're going to force that air against the microphone and it's going to make noise and make a popping sound, but you can disrupt that airflow in a variety of ways. Once again, there's some microphones at the DSATC in McCracken Hall. Finally, software, do you need to buy anything? No. There's lots of great free options out there. I'll share some on the list. Mainly, you're going to get into software more so for editing or post-production if you want to add in other things or take things out in a more advanced way. But that's something for a little later down the road. A couple of other options real quickly. In McCracken Hall, we have the Experimental Technology Lab on the second floor when we're open again. You can do things like record in front of this infinity wall, and we can take out, basically put things in the background so you're superimposed over it. There's a green screen and a photo backdrop, so you can also bring out or take away the background. Those are nice recording options. If you want to go something a little low tech, the one-button video kiosk is something one of my students and I came together with. And this literally, you push one button on it and it turns on. You put in a flash drive, you touch the pedal when you're ready to record, you do your video, you touch the pedal again and it stops, and you pull your flash drive and you have your video to take with you. That's also currently available in the Experimental Technology Lab. Once we're able to interact with each other again, we'll be happy to have people use that. We've had a couple faculty use it and like the experience for a very quick recording if you don't want to be in your office or on your laptop, but just something to think about. Otherwise, thank you for your time and consideration. I'm sorry we went over, but I loved all the questions and being able to interact with some of your comments. If you have any other comments or questions while we're still here, I'm happy to address them. If not, my email address is just right here, just strycker@ohio.edu, and I'll be happy to respond to questions that way as well. I will drop back to the chat here for a second and just see who all we have still. That was very quick at the end. But I'm very happy to do more. I know that was just a very quick overview. Once again, like I said, just that mindset aspect that I really want you to take away from this is, what can you produce to make it easier for you, but also to make it better for your students? Think about how quickly you can say something versus if you were to write it out for your students. And think about just 1 or 2 things that you can make that just over the summer. Think about, even if you just make 5 things in the next couple of months, what are 5 things you could do that are maybe only 5 or 6 minutes long to really go through there that can really help your students, make them more comfortable, make them feel more connected, and have them have a better learning experience. So thank you all. I'm starting to see some of the comments again now that I'm back. Thank you for all the very kind thoughts. I'm happy to come back again and do this in another fashion. I will share slides and I will talk about, just give you some of the links that are to some great tutorials, some great software out there. there's no shortage of options, and there's a lot of other great folks doing similar things that you can learn from as well. So there, I have amazing colleagues if we're in my unit in instructional technology or innovative learning design and technology. So I see Alan in the chat there. So Alan Wu's another great resource. Greg Kessler's another great resource. David Moore's another great resource. And I know there are other people doing amazing things with video and podcast. So I will stay here for a couple minutes if folks want to chat about anything, but if not, please feel free to drop off as others have, and have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week. Stay safe and stay healthy, everybody.